You're muted, Dion.
All right, sorry about that. Let's try this again. Modern technology. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dion Parson, and I'm honored to share my passion of music with you, our listening audience. I hope you find our show informative as we bring value and compassion to you as we explore the sounds of the diaspora through conversation and music from one artist to the next. Please know that all episodes are recorded, therefore, you can listen back to each episode at your leisure over and over again. Please share with your friends. I'm very excited tonight as we have a special guest, one of my Caribbean homeboys, someone I've known for many years when he first came to New York to pursue his master's degree at Juilliard. He's a musician that's been exploring and promoting the music of the Caribbean through his own unique sound. Please join me in welcoming to the show Mr. Etienne Charles.
Hello, Dion. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Good afternoon, good evening to all of your listeners around the world.
Thanks for joining me, Etienne. Thanks for joining me, man. Where are you today?
I'm in Los Angeles, California.
Okay. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you have a lot going on between your teaching and all of the different performances that you're doing. What's going on in Los Angeles today?
I'm doing a PBS taping with a group called the Mighty Mighty, led by a musician and musicologist named Nolan Gesser. So that's why I'm here. I'm playing Calypso with them. We're doing a segment on the show on Calypso.
Great. So let's go back. Let's take us back to your upbringing. Trinidadian born, growing up there, listening to music, playing music. You don't only just play the trumpet. You're a multi-instrumentalist. Let's talk about your upbringing in Trinidad.
I always tell people growing up in the Caribbean is well, one for me is one of the best places you could grow up because you kind of have to grow up pretty quickly, but at the same time, you get exposed to a lot at a young age. You get exposed to a wide range of musical styles, and and a lot of stuff happened outside of school. So you didn't have to worry about the stigma of learning things in school because when you're young, school is not necessarily something that you might like, right? When you put an academic spin on something, it immediately loses some of the lust or interest that it might harvest in a young person. So music was something outside of school a lot of the times. And so, the steel band was there. I was always hearing steel pan. And of course, the radio played all kinds of music. My family, like some of my uncles played. And so a lot of times my aunts played guitar. A lot of times, like family gatherings, especially on my father's side, family gatherings would end up with some sort of music playing, whether it's quattros and singing or bottle spoon, and there would be one record player and people playing along with the record player. So there was always some sort of musical thing happening with family gatherings. And then you also had Carnival, which is a seasonal celebration that would bring about a lot of different sounds to not just the radio waves, but to the everyday life in Trinidad, whether it's the sound of a pan getting tuned or sound of a steel band practicing.
Right.
The sound of a soca band sound checking. I grew up playing football, so we'd be at the field for practice or whatever, and in the early afternoon is when bands do their sound checks for shows, right? So we on the field practicing or whatever. And a band is sound checking, so you're hearing the cajon section playing by itself, you're hearing the drummer by itself, hitting the toms, hitting the floor tom, hitting the snare, hitting the
right.
key. So you get all. It's just the sound, what I call the sounds of the season. You have Parang, Christmas time, Calypso, Soca, Steel Band, Carnival time, Chutney on the radio, Chutney on TV, because of shows like Mastana Bahar. So then you have the Jose drums in September in Trinidad, which is a Muslim ritual that has a very heavy drumming tradition to it. So there was always some sort of sound
Hmm.
going on, that, and that's really why we are such a musical people. I think that music is one of the most driving forces of our daily being in Trinidad and Tobago and in the wider Caribbean. And
Hmm.
jingles were always, and I mean, there's certain jingles that I will always remember, the famous jingles from when I was small. Like there was a famous, I mean, I'm not gonna try to help these brands out, but there was a shoe company that had a great logo. They had a great jingle. The grocery had a great jingle. That was a big tradition, and we as children would know these jingles, and it was a way for you. It was looking back now as a professional person dealing with marketing brands or whatnot. I just remember that there were these very, very innate and very indigenous Trini sounds attached to these Trini brands through music.
Right.
So the music was everywhere, and so that's really what I take away from my upbringing in Trinidad, is that there was music everywhere.
And I agree with you because the same thing I experienced in the Virgin Islands. I think it may have been a little bit different in Trinidad. You were closer to South America, and we had the American influence, so we had a lot of the disco and the modern music as well. But like you mentioned, the drumming, and everywhere you went was live music and the jingles. Like we have our own commercials as well. But I think the biggest rivalry I remember growing up was Carnival. Like, who had the best Carnival?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this is Trinidad will have the biggest Carnival, but everybody's gonna claim to be the best. And I never participated in the bands on that level, traveling from into Ireland for Carnival. But I remember a lot of bands going to Trinidad for Carnival and coming back, talking about Road March and stuff. So there was a heavy competition in the greater Caribbean for who had the best carnival and who had the best band.
Hmm.
Yeah, so the music was always prominent and prevalent in the community. And I recall coming to New York. One of the first musicians I met also was David Williams,
Hmm.
a bass
Happy,
player from Trinidad.
yeah, Happy's father was a legendary band leader in Trinidad as well, John Buddy Williams.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And going to the Pan Jazz Festival in Trinidad, I performed down there with Monty Alexander and met so many musicians at that time. So it's a good, I think, is a good foundation, a fostering ground for musicians coming out of Trinidad. So you left Trinidad and you went to college to pursue your degree.
Yeah, I went to Florida State University to do my first degree under Marcus Roberts, Leon Anderson, Rodney Jordan, and Scotty Barnhart were my main teachers,
Hmm.
as well as Bill Peterson and Bill Kennedy. I they kind of all took me under their wing and showed me different things. So it was because it was a small program, I was able to get a very unique experience as a student. A lot of one-on-one time with
Hmm.
each person. Marcus Roberts for composition. And not just to study composition, but to play his music. We learned
Right.
his music,
Hmm.
playing it with him and touring with him and playing in his band. So it was a very wholesome, almost like on the job training about
Hmm.
music. And then from that, he was always very vocal about making sure that you're able to have your music be a reflection of your identity, whether it's a
Yes.
cultural identity or academic identity, or whichever way, or fusion of the few. So he was always, once I started showing him a lot of the stuff that I was checking out and from Trinidad and stuff, he was very motivated to motivate me
Hmm.
to keep that direction and keep kind of going down this rabbit hole of all of these things that he really had never heard and never explored. And so part of it was his interest, and then part of it was me continuing to dig and show that we have a lot of stuff in the Caribbean that hardly ever gets space on American airwaves or
Right.
European airwaves, and especially in the very closed off genre of jazz. And so that's kind of been my mandate from the get-go. And I say Caribbean, but what I'm really specifically referring to is is music from the English speaking and music from the French and Dutch Caribbean, because there's a lot on the airwaves that you would hear from, Cuban artists and Puerto Rican artists and even Mexican artists and Dominican artists. And so for me, it was like, well, there was such a small space for artists from the English speaking Caribbean. And the first records I had was Yard Movement by Monty Alexander. And so some of my earliest introductions to jazz with a Caribbean tinge, which is how I always tell people that you have to make sure that people get to hear themselves in music, and young people, especially young Black people, especially, that they get to hear themselves. And so hearing Monty, I was 13 or 14 when I got Yard Movement, and then when I was 17, I started checking out Chucho Valdez, and then my freshman year of college, I got heavily into David Sanchez. So at three very formative points in my early development, the records that I listened to the most were all by Caribbean artists, which I think is very important as to why I am the way I am with music.
Right. And you actually played with those artists as well, right?
Yeah, I'm very, very lucky that, three of my biggest idols in music, I spent many hour on a bandstand in many a country. I got to play with Monty Alexander in Jamaica and in New York. I got to tour the world with Chucho Valdez. I toured, for 4 years with David Sanchez, standing right next to him in SF Jazz Collective, as well as one season with Miguel Zenon, who was a member of the David Sanchez quintet that really inspired me to work, our folk rhythms and song forms and phrasing styles into jazz composition. David's record Melaza, which featured Miguel and Edsel Gomez and Antonio Sanchez and Hans Klavischnik, is still one of the records I go back to over and over again to think about ways that we can continue to move forward, with this, what I call jazz with almost like a Caribbean accent. So clear that it's based on the improvisatory styles, but it's rooted more in a home vibe. And we in the Caribbean have a very big stake in this music, because at the earliest points in this music's development, you had migrations from the Caribbean. They were West Indians in Louis Armstrong's Hot Fives, Hot Sevens. There were multiple. You had St. Cyr, you had Henry Ezekiel Clark. Henry Ezekiel Clark was from Guyana, I think. So we've been in these spaces, not the Adley brothers of Bahamian America, and then you go down the long list of all of these different Winter Kelly being Jamaican American, and Oscar Peterson's family being from Tortola, Sonny Rollins' family from the Virgin Islands, and I mean, it's a long list. I mean, Connie K and Mickey Roker, and it's always interesting because there's always a name. You can always tell by the names. Right? So for me, that's and Roy Haynes, and it became a deep dive not just into the music, but also who come from where.
Exactly.
And putting out the music drew them to me, and they started talking to me and telling me, oh yeah, my grandmother was from so and so, my mother was from so and so, father was from so and so. They always used to play music like that. So that's why I continue to dig.
And that's great, man. That's beautiful, man, because research is all part of it. But like you said, it's like you start doing what you're doing, and it connects and draw other people to you. You're talking about David Sanchez. I first met David at Rutgers University.
Right, because y'all were both grad students there, right?
Yeah, I was actually, we both was undergraduate. When he first left Puerto Rico, he came to Rutgers. That's where I first met him. And when I first got to New York, one of the first gigs I had was Monty Alexander, performing with Monty. So, those are two of your icons right there. We just did a music festival here on St. Croix, Virgin Islands. We brought in Chucho Valdez. Nice. I first met Chucho in Cuba, being down there with Steve Torre. I've unfortunately never played with Chucho, but I spent a lot of time around him and got a chance to witness him rehearse his band and stuff. So it's a lot of influence there. And like you said, every island have its own thing, but it all comes back to rhythms and the harmonies. And you was talking about creating this sound, taking the rhythms and the harmonies and creating your sound of the Caribbean. So over the years, having my own band as well, I was fortunate to meet great musicians like yourself and other people to influence us, we came up with a word called Jazz Ribian. And Jazz
Ah,
Ribian is where jazz meets the Caribbean. Like you have Creole Soul and
yeah.
Caiso. I've heard Caiso coming up when, people would explain different versions of Calypso, but I think Jazz Ribian kind of, it kind of covers the whole Caribbean because there's so many musicians in New York now, just in the States, that have left the Caribbean that's playing jazz on a high level. On a
Hmm.
very, very, I mean, you hear these guys playing bebop and stuff, and you'll never believe they're from the Caribbean. So once you add that rhythmical component to it and start experimenting with the rhythms like you have been doing, I think Jazz Caribbean is a word that kind of summarizes it all.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it goes all the way back. I mean, the history. I always tell people history. There's a famous poet from Trinidad. Her name is Dion, and she has this saying. When I walk into the room, history is already sitting in the chair.
Mhm.
And when I first started listening to the Clifford Brown Max Roach Quintet, and I started hearing them playing like these almost like quasi calypso rhythm, but also just like Clifford Brown's phrasing.
Mhm.
His really deep bouncing, almost calypso-esque phrasing, and it was different to mambo, right? It was
Mhm.
definitely more on a upbeat side than a mambo thing. I immediately started tying him to the Caribbean.
Oh yeah.
And then to come to find out, Wilmington, Delaware, at the time that he was growing up, and still all the way up until when Bob Marley was coming up, had a heavy Jamaican population.
Hmm.
And as far as Philadelphia, many of the landlords were West Indian. Jimmy Heat's landlord was Jamaican when he
Hmm.
was living in Philadelphia, right? So people have to remember that Caribbean people have been migrating to the U.S. for a long time, and there was an area in New York called San Juan Hill, which is where Thelonious Monk grew up once he left North Carolina with his mother, and it was a big melting pot of people, right? You had West Indians there, you had people from the South
Hmm.
of the United States, you had people from Puerto Rico, you had Irish people, you even had Filipinos there, right? And so when I listen to Monk and I hear that he chooses these names like Bemsha Swing, which is in tribute to Barbados because
Hmm.
Bemshire is Barbados, and Denzel Best was one of his closest friends, and Denzel Best's family was from Barbados. Be
Exactly.
My Dear is about Ruby Richardson, who's this Antiguan American woman. That our culture has been influencing the music. That's why Duke Ellington used to play, has this song called West Indian Pancake, and Count Basie used to end the show with Don't Stop the Carnival, and you could go on this
Hmm.
long list of the 50s when before Belafonte hit the scene, when these big bands were playing calypsos, and it was really out of that you
Right.
see Belafonte coming to the mix, because at first he was a jazz singer, and his first group, I think it was Charlie Parker. I want to say his first group was like Charlie Parker, Max Roach, Charlie Mingus, John Lewis.
Rhythm
I think
section.
that was
Yeah.
the band. I think that was the band.
Hmm.
And then and then there's, of course, Monty Alexander played me the recording of Charlie Parker playing Sly Mongoose.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. I've never heard that one. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really incredible that that calypso was, and I mean that's the thing about the history of New York, that there's only parts of that history that are told, but Greenwich Village was Little Africa,
Hmm.
right? And that's why the Village Vanguard is where it is, because the
Hmm.
Village was where all the black clubs were, and
Hmm.
before it was 100% a jazz club, the Village Vanguard was a variety club.
Right.
And the Duke of Iron used to play there for 6 weeks at a time. The Roaring Lion played there for 6 weeks at a time. And these are West Indian acts, and they would clearly do that to make sure they drew the Caribbean population coming out. And I don't think the Village Vanguard became a full-on jazz club until, I don't know, maybe the 40s. But all through the 20s and 30s when I was there, it was a variety club with
Right.
calypso and this,
Like,
that.
like the Palladium. Yeah, the Palladium.
Yeah, exactly. So it actually changes the history of Black New York, the
Mhm.
way when you find out that certain spaces that we see as jazz spaces were actually omni Black art spaces.
The spaces of the diaspora.
Exactly, spaces of the diaspora. Same with San Juan Hill. So
Hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot to continuously be discovered.
Oh yeah, yeah. And you was mentioning other artists as well. Jimmy Hamilton played with Duke Ellington. He was from St. Croix. I remember coming home to do an event shortly after coming out of college. Jimmy Hamilton had moved back here and was actually teaching in the public schools. And I was trying to tell these kids like the significance of who this man is. And yes, it's just a lot of history from the Caribbean as far as contribution to the music. And I've had this conversation with Wynton Marsalis many times. And that's one of the things he's always said, like the Caribbean is one of the last few uncharted territory when it comes to the music and what's happening. And each island has its own tinge and the same rhythm and its own vibe in it. And even if you go back to listen to old time calypso, you know, that roundhouse bass line, boom, 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 ding, boom, 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 ding, ding, ding. You know, all of those jump up vamps and stuff is all the blues. It's just playing off of the blues, you know. So that's one of the influences that I realized first. The music that we were listening to had the same rhythmical foundation and the harmonic foundation as the blues and stuff that we was hearing coming from America. A lot of it wasn't being expanded on because the knowledge of improvisation and stuff wasn't there, but the fundamental changes was already there. So it made a lot of sense to me once I jumped into jazz. I don't know about you, but a lot of things got connected real quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because you know there's all these different recordings that are coming out now, you know, of like experimental improvisations that happened in the Caribbean long time ago. I mean, because ragtime was very popular in the Caribbean,
Exactly.
right? And then you had these string bands. So you had this band called back then it was known as the Trinidad Dance Orchestra. It was a lovely string band, and it was an integrated band. It was led by a Euro-descendant by the name of George Bailey, Baillie. And it was an integrated band, and they went to New York in 1912, and they recorded for the major labels. And that's 5 years before Original Dixieland Jazz Band recorded what is supposed to be the first jazz record on phonograph. But these men are improvising.
Right.
Clearly, there's there's a violinist improvising, there's a clarinetist blazing improvising. So it's you know the language was always changing, and then you know you have World War II and the U.S. set up a base in Trinidad. They set up 2 bases in Trinidad, and that's how radio waves came to Trinidad. The first radio stations in Trinidad were the U.S. Army radio stations. So there was Glenn Miller, etc. And then right after that, you start hearing all these almost like big band style introductions to calypsos, and it's because of the arranging, right? And there was a great arranger by the name of Rupert Nurse who passed away a few years ago. He was a bass player and saxophone player, and he took a mail order arranging course with one of Glenn Miller's
arranging course.
Yeah, so they basically used to mail you the book and mail you the exercises, and you would do the exercises and mail it back. And he learned to arrange taking that course, and then immediately he started. You hear, I mean. His style is so like, I mean, he's the one that started making the horn section. So like you have a 4-piece horn section and you have saxes playing one thing and then you have the brass playing another thing. So it almost has like the idea of a big band moving around.
Right.
Like My Pussin' is a great example of it. Steel band music is another example of it.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that Kitchener put out in the late 40s, early 50s, that was all Rupert Nurse's arrangements.
Okay.
And you know, it clearly shows this link, this dialogue between North America and the Caribbean, you know.
Right, because a lot of the bands was going to New York to record.
Yeah, I mean, they did a lot of recordings, and even though RCA and Victor built studios in Trinidad in the 1920s, they've been recording, you know, high tech in studios in Trinidad since like 1927. Okay. They built a studio. RCA and Victor, they built a studio in Port of Spain. I think it was on Nelson Street, I want to say. Because you know that back then that was they were recording a lot of music in Trinidad.
Well, that was a big hub back then. I mean, everybody went to Trinidad for great horn arrangements. Even like Lord Nelson, Kissinger, and all of these guys. As you fast forward to the 50s and 60s, that was the big thing. That was the time I grew up. and that's what we heard. Everybody had a horn section.
Yeah, that was the bread and butter, and then a lot of the recordings started moving to New York. In the 70s, you saw the Granville Straker and and Ralston Charles have these very top level record labels putting out soca and calypso. Ralston Charles, famous Charlie's Records as we know it.
Yep.
And they really were some of the biggest advocates for getting the music, into the popular ears worldwide.
Right.
But for me, when I listen to soca music, especially the records that they did in New York, when you listen to Arrow's music, or when you listen to the stuff that Byron was putting out, or the stuff that Leston Paul was doing. And as much as it's a Trinidadian songwriter or a Trinidadian calypsonian and a Trinidadian singer, I see soca as a Caribbean music. Because the musicians that were playing it were from all over. People forget that the bass man on a lot of those famous soca recordings, he was from Panama. Right? And the horn section, Mark Guggenheim is playing lead trumpet on a lot of that stuff. If it's not Mark, it's a guy named Ricky Braffett. Ricky Braffett is from Barbados. And then, of course, you have Errolins from Trinidad. Charles Dougherty on saxophone from Jamaica. Clifton Anderson on trombone. That's Sonny Rollins' nephew. He family from the Virgin Islands.
Don't forget Gary Bartz.
Gary Bartz did a lot of that stuff too.
He's an icon from Maryland. Bartz,
So so it's a very. I saw it as a very Pan-African diaspora. It's almost like the diaspora converging in the studio, and the music
right, exactly.
The music that came out was soca. You listen to Arrow's music or Swallow's music, and there's this very funky energy to the music, and a lot of that funkiness comes from the fact that the arena, like Leston Paul, was clearly influenced by Earth, Wind and Fire.
Exactly. All sections.
You hear the Jerry Hay and David Foster, and you hear that, and you hear the Charles Stepney influence in his arrangements, and then you put that with the soca beat, and you have this big mix-up thing, and it's like
right. And the thing back then is like when we were coming up, we idolized those groups. So we, like you mentioned, a lot of the music was played outside of school. So we were emulating those bands, and horn section actually, there was parts to learn, and that's a challenge we have these days because a lot of that have disappeared. So, but there was parts to learn. I remember first moving to New York and playing in a wedding band. We never rehearsed. We would just get sent these charts and recordings and show up. And the horn section ranged from Carl Gayton to, like everybody was playing in the band. But it would just come like nailing.
I started up doing that too. That's where when I was I bought my car playing weddings in New York.
That was part of the repertoire. Learn the Earth, Wind and Fire horn sections. All of the pop tunes and
September,
all of those,
all the classics.
Yeah, man. So it's really interesting how. But I think, and I'm gonna just put this out there because this is how I felt when I got to New York. It's like we had a much broader scope of music to digest than if we grew up in America. Because Americans, of course, they had jazz and gospel and R&B and country and all of that, but we had a whole nother thing with Latin, salsa, merengue, zouk, mento, calypso, soca. We had some, and then we're not even talking about the Brazilian experience. So when we talk about the Caribbean diaspora and the music coming out of the Caribbean, it's a whole world that's still unexplored.
And then I think, it's interesting because in America, I feel like, especially after being a teacher here I've been teaching in the U.S. since sophomore year of college, right? So almost 20 years. I think people get put into categories at a young age, right? So like you play classical music, so you play jazz, and so then they streamline you, so then it's just like boom. Whereas in the Caribbean, it's like you playing wherever has to be played,
exactly,
at whatever point, right? So it gave you all of these different things to draw from, and for me, I remember the first time I heard Stevie Wonder's music, and I was like, okay, try to play that, and then try to play this. So it kind of, and then you think about the phenomenon. After hanging out with me, Ralph McDonald was probably one of my most important mentors and one of my closest friends. And when it's only because I would spend time with him that I realized how many Caribbean musicians were on pop recordings in New York.
Oh yeah.
So when you think about Eric Gale and Richard T and Marcus Miller and Ralph McDonald as the rhythm section on a record, that's basically all Caribbean people.
Yep.
And that's and then I think you have Harvey Mason, but that's the rhythm section for like Breezing,
and then if they weren't from the Caribbean, there was influence because my good friend Buddy Williams, man.
Yeah, Buddy's West Indian too. Buddy's family's from Trinidad and Barbados.
Right. But
Buddy and Happy are actually cousins.
Okay. So I didn't know that. But Buddy,
he's from Bed-Stuy.
Upbringing, I just spoke to him a couple of weeks. He's like, West Indians, man. He's in it, man. And Buddy was like, he was on everything from David Sanborn to Roberta Flack.
Yeah. I mean, so many Stanley Banks, the bass player.
Banks, exactly. Yeah.
Richard T's family from Suriname. His real name is Richard Tenrick. Eric Gale's family.
But you mentioned Ralph McDonald as a percussionist. A lot of people don't know he was a great composer, man. He wrote so many of those,
he was a great songwriter. Where's the Love and In the Name of Love and Mr. Magic for Roberta Flack, which then became really famous with Grover Washington's version of it. He had the Calypso Breakdown, which was the number one disco. He had two number one disco tunes. He had Calypso Breakdown and he had Jam on the Groove, and those was Calypso Breakdown was supposed to be the song in the dance battle in Saturday Night Fever, the movie. But after they shot the movie, they edited the dance fight scene or the dance off scene, whatever you want to call it. And so they had to shorten the music, so they didn't use Calypso Breakdown anymore. They used another song. But Calypso Breakdown still made it onto the soundtrack. And that's how Ralph, Bill Salter, and Bill Eaton ended up with
Bill Salter,
a song. They ended up with a song on the number. At the time, it was the number 2 best. At the time, it was the number 1 best-selling album of all time. I think it sold 42 million copies. And then the only album to sell more was Thriller.
Right.
And so, and back then, you got 25 cents a copy.
Yeah, back then.
And so, they were instantly millionaires. They were instantly. And so, but yeah, I mean, and the Caribbean space in pop music in America, it was like, it was always, but Ralph was basically playing calypso grooves on, like, you listen to Late in the Evening by Paul Simon. That's basically a calypso.
You play calypso grooves on everything,
And then you listen to Late in the Evening.
And Ralph played anything, man. I was doing a gig with Gordon, and he just came up with a bottle and a spoon next to me.
Yeah, I was there. This was at Dizzy's.
Exactly. And
Jimmy
put a
Buffett's
soul on it, man, and tore the house down, man.
It was Jimmy Buffett's party. I have a picture
Jimmy Buffett's party, exactly, yeah.
I actually have a picture of Ralph beating that bottle. It was a glass, actually. It wasn't a bottle, it was a glass.
Yeah.
I mean, you listen to the Graceland album that Paul Simon did. You listen to Call Me Al. That's literally the same bass line as Sugar Boom Boom. It's like zoom doom 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 ding ding ding. So now it's for me, that's a big part of what I do as well, is always trying to find us in the space, like what we have, because we don't get hype like the Caribbean. We don't really, the Caribbean is not seen as a viable artistic source, right?
Right.
In a lot of instances. And part of my purpose is to play the music of people like Hazel Scott and Winifred Atwell, and so that people know that these are people from the Caribbean,
right?
And that and Lord Woodbine, and that the three of them right there. I mean, you have Hazel Scott. Winifred Atwell was Elton John's biggest influence on the piano. You have Lord Woodbine was the Beatles' influence, their first manager. I'm talking about two of the most influential and best-selling artists of all time, having heavily influences from the Caribbean, specifically from Trinidad, right? And there's instances of that for the Virgin Islands. One of my favorite musicians was from the Virgin Islands. I'm talking about musicians in the pop space is John Lucien, and he was And in addition to a great singer and songwriter, I mean, his bass playing.
He was a great bass player. I was getting ready to say, man, I used to play gigs with him on the bass when I was in college, and I would come back to St. Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah, his bass playing was next level.
Yeah, he had a great feel, man.
What was that record he did on bass that a lot of people don't know he's a bass player? It's like a famous record.
Rashida.
Well, Rashida, he's singing on. That's
him. But he did. Let me see which one.
There's another record that he was pretty famous for playing bass on. I'm trying to remember the name.
I gotta go back and. But speaking, not save that thought because I want to get to some of your music.
Okay.
we could talk and talk for a while, man. There's a lot of information flowing here, but let's check out Dame Lorraine. Let's check out Dame Lorraine. It's from your new album that you just released, and you could talk about it once we get back after listening to it.
San Francisco, good evening. How we feeling tonight? Welcome to the Black Cat. Put your hands together. The piano from La Habana, Cuba, Mr. Axel Tosca Lauga. At the guitar from Morristown, New Jersey, Mr. Alex Wentz. At the bass from Washington, D.C., the human jukebox himself, Ben Williams. At the alto saxophone from Bridgeport, Connecticut, by way of Haiti, Professor Godwin Louis. And at the drums and cymbals from Miami, Florida, standing at 5'11", by way of Haiti as well. Put your hands together for the one and only, my brother from another, Mr. Obed Calver.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So that's Dame Lorraine, huh?
Yeah, that was, that's how we've been opening the show for the last about a year. We recorded that in I have to big up Rashawn Ross, saying hello to my brother,
Yes, sir. What's up, Rashawn?
Rashawn, I remember when I was at Berkeley, the 5-week program in 2000. Rashawn, it was all the VI brothers used to sit in the cafeteria and make one set of noise, just talking usual Caribbean nonsense in the middle of the day while we were having lunch or breakfast or whatever. It was like they were always in the cafeteria. And I would always hail them out. And they would be like, "Oh, well, I'm Trini," So it was, I remember from all the way back then. But yeah, that's down. That's our show opener for about the past year, maybe a year and a half. We've been doing down. But we recorded this album. This is actually from Live in San Francisco. This version of it. We recorded that in March of 2022 at the Black Cat in San Francisco. Okay. And what I love about listening to this track is, what I love about Creole Soul now is that it's become it's almost like a Caribbean conglomerate of musicians, It's Axel's from Cuba, and Godwin and Obed, a Haitian American, Ben is from DC, but he grew up in DC, went DC had a Caribbean population. And on top of that, he has Gullah roots from South Carolina, which is clearly
right. Well, that's clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and so, it's just so I hear everybody putting their own feel on, and it for me, it brings joy when I listen back to, because I hardly ever listen to the band, I hardly ever listen to what we do, but it brings joy just to remember these moments and just know that it's, we're trying to keep the dance music moving.
That's great, man. Well, congratulations on the new release, and
thank you.
I know you have a number of projects going on, and this being one of them. I've followed this band for many years, and you have some great musicians. Some of my favorite musicians in the band. I love listening to them and hearing what you've put together. So congratulations on that. This past summer, you did another project in the Appel Room. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we did Carnival. We did Carnival, The Sound of a People, which is a concert. Originally, it was an album, but it was a concert with Creole Soul as the band, plus traditional Carnival characters from Trinidad on stage, dancing to kind of replicate a performance version of what happens on the streets of Trinidad Carnival time, but also as a way for these traditional characters to communicate the history of Trinidad and Tobago. We all have similar traditions. I mean, I know you have the Moko Jambi in St. Thomas. I know they have it in St. Croix as well. We have it in Trinidad. And it's one of our clear links to West Africa, right? Same thing with Dame Lorraine, same thing with Jab Balassi, etc. And so I developed this project in 2016 to be a way to show that our rituals are our way of communicating with our past, and we do it through art, through music, through costuming, through food, through language. And so that's and we were lucky enough to get to do it in New York, and we did it in New York, we did it in Toronto, we did it in Miami, we did it in London, we did it in San Francisco and Los Angeles. So I'm grateful because I was able to take it to many of the different parts of the Caribbean diaspora, which was the point, was to communicate this music and the fact that this comes out of these costume traditions to the places where we have gone.
Right. But I must tell you this. I love the sound that you've put together to represent it on a high level. It's like you've taken the music from the streets and put it on a really you brought it to the rest of the world on a sophisticated stage. But I must say that Carnival, no matter what island you come from, when it's Carnival time, the folks come together and they're going to celebrate. They're going to spend 6 months making their costumes. So that's a great concept, man, to present that on that level, because there's going to always have a platform for that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because to see how the American audience took to it, even though they don't know much about the characters. When we did, I never forget, we did the show in Trinidad. The world premiere was in Trinidad in 2017, and there was a sold out show, but it was an audience full of people who were familiar with these characters.
Right.
They came kind of knowing what they were going to see, but they didn't know what they were going to hear. And so when they were done, it was like, wow, there's clearly a relation between the music and the sights and whatnot. And that would sound of a people. So that's why you hear Tambu Bambu, you hear the Calypso group, you hear Iron, you hear Steel Pan. Because I wanted to make sure that we use the sound, the biscuit tins from the Jab Malasi, so that throughout the whole suite, you're hearing all of these different sounds that came from the migrations of peoples from around the world, specifically to Trinidad. And so that's what we've taken now. We did it in New York, in Miami. We have films that go along with it that kind of immerse people into. It's like we put them on the streets of Trinidad.
Right, exactly.
Carnival Friday, we put them up in the hills of Parson. We take them down to the countryside of Claxton Bay. We take them into the Laventil Rhythm section of Practice Yard and on Old St. Joseph's Road in Laventil. So we literally export people because so few places that we know, that we grew up with, that we see. You never see them on a big screen.
You never.
Everybody
when you do see some Caribbean-ish something is very watered down.
Right. And so I was like, what if I take the realest of real images from Carnival,
right,
and put them on a big screen on top of a big stage with my musicians playing my music, and show the audience, what we see that we want them to see.
From your eyes, exactly.
And it's been, and also, but to show, there's so many people in Trinidad who had never seen Tambu Bambu.
Okay.
Or understood that story really. And so for them it was also, and for them to see it on the big screen. I remember when we played in Miami, a lady came up to me after the show and she said, because we take Claxton, the Bamboo video is in Claxton Bay, and at the beginning of it, kind of like in movie style, the name Claxton Bay comes up as where we are. And she came to me, she said she started crying because she never thought she would have seen her hometown on a big screen like that. Because, for her, the Caribbean, the Trinidad specifically, is so quote unquote town oriented, and everything is about Port of Spain, and it's not. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's what the project is about, taking people to the real, to see where all of the real parts are. As Carnival is not just a Port of Spain thing. Carnival is a nationwide thing. So
that's great, man. That's great. Well, man, can we squeeze one more song in there?
Sure. I mean, yeah, sure.
Because I know you're a very busy man, and I would love to have our audience hear another one of your songs. So why don't you pick? We have a couple. We have Creole. We have a couple of songs we could pick from.
Is Bamboo there?
Bamboo's there, yes.
Yeah. So Bamboo, we could play Bamboo because Bamboo is what, and there's a video that goes along with Bamboo. If you ever come to a Creole Soul show, you'll see the video live. Those videos don't live anywhere on the internet. You can only see them live at our shows because, in addition to the content being very sacred and special, it's a part of the experience of coming to a Creole Soul show. And but it's in Claxton Bay, and Tambu Bambu is a really important tradition because it comes from when the British banned the drumming in Trinidad and Tobago in 1884. There was an ordinance passed called the Peace and Preservation Act, which made drumming illegal. And so as a result, musicians started designing alternate instruments to play rhythm and to accompany the stick fight and to accompany rituals. And so they started cutting bamboo at different lengths to create the different pitches. And I was lucky enough to record them live on the streets in Claxton Bay.
Nice. Okay.
And so you get a very immersed sound because we're literally in the middle of the band. We're right in the middle of them. And then I took that and I wrote some music to it. And So you hear Russell Hall on bass, and you hear Jacques Schwartzbard on tenor saxophone. And it's just the three of us and this whole Claxton Bay Tampa Bamboo Band.
Okay. Well, let's check it out. Bamboo. That's great, man. It just shows that you can make music out of anything. You can make music out of anything, man. That's wonderful. Bamboo. So what's next for Etienne Charles?
Next, oh man,
What's your gig tonight?
Where's my next gig? Oh, I'm playing in. Next show is in Pittsburgh. No, we play in Ann Arbor on Friday, the 27th, and we play in Pittsburgh on Saturday, the 28th. We play at the Blue Llama on the 27th in Ann Arbor, and we play at the New Hazlitt Theater in Pittsburgh on the 28th. I try to make sure to play jazz clubs as well as concert halls, as well as festivals, because I am of the belief that jazz grows in the clubs. You know, like that's the closest thing to where this music was born, right?
Very
and
intimate.
So and the intimate experience of a jazz club is, you can't imitate that, and you can't replicate that. You can't repeat that in a concert hall. Like the feel of a jazz club, the idea of feeling the audience, reading the audience, and the levels of improv comedy and the way the musicians experiment and play, like you can't match that anywhere else. I'm a big advocate of supporting and playing in jazz clubs, because all of the greatest recordings, live recordings that we know, all came from bands playing multiple nights in clubs. And so that the music has to continue to stay there. I always encourage people, if you can, please go and support your local jazz club. I'm sure there's one wherever you live. There's a space for the music, and go see it as much as you can. I think of jazz or live music like weekly medicine, and I think you should try to take in live music once a week. But perhaps at the end of your week, whether it's a Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, whichever night. But I think try to take some live music in. If it's a jazz club, great. If it's a hotel bar, great. Somewhere that music is being played live. We do it for you, and we need you to have these spaces continue to thrive, so that we can continue to create, innovate, educate, and that's what it's about.
Well, man, it's been a pleasure, Etienne. A wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure you have a lot more to say. So we're gonna
get
back.
I'd love to, man. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a great platform you've developed in, and it's in the early stages, but you already have Hurlin Riley, and just to be included in that cadre of musicians is an honor and privilege, and to be able to connect the diaspora, which really is what it's all about, is us being able to unify, to celebrate each other and our sound, which, we all in the diaspora are basically searching for home through music. That's what we do, right? We're searching for where our ancestors came from. We're searching for where they went. And that's how we do it through music. Painters do it through art. Writers do it through lyrics. Langston Hughes, Negro Speaks of Mirrors. You go down Rivers. You go down a long list of how different Black creatives and different diasporal creatives use art to really be searching for where home is, and so to be able to connect it here on your platform, it's really special. So thank you for taking the time and for choosing to have me on here. So it's really a privilege, and because you're one of the people I looked up to. I got to see your group 21st Century. Many times we would be doing a double bill, like we would be, we're doing Rose Hall, and y'all, selling out. Y'all would sell out. If they had given you a chance, you could have probably sold out 2 weeks at Dizzy's, because I remember that place would be. Everybody in the VI would be in New York. I was like New York week.
Man.
And everybody would be out. For me, it was just a beautiful thing to see that many Caribbean people inside a jazz club taking in jazz.
Exactly. I mean, you with your event across the way too, man, it was just great, because I know you started off at City College, but then when you came down, it was like the whole building was taken over by West Indians.
Yeah, it was that. Hey, we need to figure out a way to do that again. So are y'all gonna be doing Dizzy's in June?
We have we actually have May 30, 31st, June 1st, and June 2nd.
Okay, nice.
24. Yeah, we have 4 nights next year. Yeah, already.
Nice.
So yeah, man. So we're gonna keep working, conversating, figuring out ways how we could collaborate. But this has been awesome. We're gonna definitely have you back, because it's a lot of notes I have here, man. I didn't even get to half of what I wrote.
Man, yeah. Well, we'll do it again. I'm very happy to, if or we find a time where we could sit down for longer and listen to records, and you could play stuff that you want to check.
All of that, yeah.
And we go from there, man. So
definitely.
enjoy St. Thomas.
Yes.
And I wish I was in the Caribbean right now. So
yeah, I know, man. I know, but you enjoy LA, man. Have a great gig tonight.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of our audience members out there that's checking us out, we just want to thank you for taking the time to grace us with your presence and knowledge and music.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Etienne Charles, and continued success to you and your band. And all of the wonderful projects you're working on, and from an education standpoint too, because you're a wonderful educator, and we will talk about that as well.
Thank you, brother. You take care of yourself, and we'll be in touch.
Definitely. Take care.
Take care.
And for the rest of our audience out there, before I sign off, I just want to thank you all for joining us, whether you're streaming, listening, or watching us. I would like to just share with you our wonderful guest next week will be this amazing flautist. Her name is Christine Gangelhoff. She's a professor at the University of the Bahamas. And what makes Christine so interesting to us here in the Caribbean and her contribution to the diaspora, she spent like the last 20 years archiving Afro-Caribbean composers in the classical world, from Haiti on through Cuba all the way down to Trinidad, and she's done a wonderful job. So we will be talking with Christine about her research about the Afro-Caribbean classical composers within our diaspora. So we look forward to having a wonderful show with her next week. So thank you all for joining us, and have a blessed evening.